On the night of January 26, 1945, off the western coast of Burma, British sailors heard something they could not explain. Not gunfire, not explosions, but screaming. It rose from a mangrove swamp stretching 10 miles inland. Screams that continued for hours, then faded one by one. By dawn, an estimated 900 to 1,000 Japanese soldiers had vanished. This was not a battle. It was not an ambush, and it was not planned. What happened on Ramree Island would later be called the deadliest animal attack in recorded history. And even today, historians argue over how much of it can be proven, and how much is too horrific to fully document. Today, we reconstruct what happened, step by step, hour by hour, using military records, eyewitness testimony, and modern analysis.
By late 1944, the war in Burma had turned decisively against Japan. The British 14th Army, under General William Slim, was advancing west to east, reclaiming territory lost in 1942. But one obstacle blocked the coastal supply route: Ramree Island. Its deep-water harbor could support airfields and naval operations essential for the liberation of Rangoon. Whoever controlled Ramree controlled the coast. The Japanese understood this. A garrison of approximately 1,000 soldiers, reinforced with artillery and bunkers, had orders to hold the island at all costs. They would not be evacuated, they would not surrender, and they would not be reinforced.
On January 21, 1945, British and Indian forces, supported by the Royal Navy, began their assault. Naval guns pounded Japanese positions. Royal Marines landed under covering fire. The fighting was brutal but uneven. By January 26, British troops had split the Japanese defenses. Cut off from supplies, low on ammunition, many already wounded. At this moment, the Japanese commander faced a choice every garrison commander dreads: surrender or attempt escape. The order was given. They would retreat east into what appeared on maps as empty ground: a 10-mile mangrove swamp.
The swamp was not empty. Ramree's mangroves were flooded twice daily by the tide, thick with mud, insects, disease, and saltwater crocodiles. Modern biologists identify this region as having one of the densest crocodile populations in Southeast Asia. The Japanese soldiers entered at low tide, expecting to cross before dawn. But the tide turned. Water rose to the waist, then the chest. Movement slowed. Many men were bleeding, bandaged wounds soaking through uniforms. And blood carries far in tidal water. British sailors offshore would later report sounds: sudden splashing, shouts, then screams, continuing deep into the night. What exactly happened inside the swamp is still debated, but by morning, almost no one came out.
As darkness fell on January 26, 1945, visibility inside the swamp dropped to almost nothing. There was no moon. Mangrove roots formed walls and tunnels. Mosquitoes swarmed. Men stumbled, fell, and disappeared into the water. At sea, British destroyers and landing craft maintained their blockade. Orders were clear: no escape from the island. Several sailors later described hearing isolated gunshots, not from combat, but from men firing blindly into the water. Then the first screams. Not shouts of command, not cries of alarm, but prolonged, panicked screaming. The kind sailors recognized as men dying slowly. The sounds carried across the water for hours.
Saltwater crocodiles are not ambush predators like alligators. They are territorial, highly sensitive to vibration, and capable of detecting blood from long distances. An adult can exceed 6 meters in length and attack from below without warning. In 1945, Ramree Island's mangroves were untouched, a near-perfect habitat. British naturalists stationed in Burma before the war had already documented aggressive crocodile behavior in tidal swamps, but no one, on either side, had ever seen hundreds of wounded men enter such an environment at once. This was not a single attack. If attacks occurred, they would have happened repeatedly throughout the night as the tide rose and fell.
Not every man in the swamp was killed by animals. Some died of wounds, some drowned, some succumbed to infection within hours. A small number, accounts vary between 20 and fewer than 50, emerged days later. They were emaciated, covered in leech bites, many delirious. British records note that survivors surrendered immediately. None attempted to fight. Their testimony was fragmented, often incoherent, but consistent on one point. Men vanished in the water without warning. Those who climbed mangrove roots were dragged down. Those who remained still were attacked from below. Silence was the only temporary defense.
The most cited account of Ramree comes from Bruce Stanley Wright, a British naturalist and officer. Writing after the war, Wright described a night of screaming, rarely duplicated on Earth. His account was later referenced by the Guinness Book of World Records, which labeled Ramree the deadliest animal attack in history. But modern historians urge caution. Military casualty records do not specify causes of death. No formal body count was possible inside the swamp, and survivor testimony was limited. What can be stated with certainty is this: nearly the entire Japanese force disappeared. Fewer than 10% survived. Many deaths occurred inside the mangrove swamp, and British forces never recovered most bodies. Whether crocodiles killed hundreds, or dozens, or far fewer, Ramree remains one of the most horrifying natural death traps ever entered by a military force.
The single most overlooked element of Ramree Island is not the crocodiles, but the tide. The mangrove swamp flooded twice daily, with water levels rising more than 6 feet in some channels. Japanese troops entered during low tide, when mudflats appeared passable. By midnight, the tide had returned. Channels deepened, paths vanished. Men who could stand an hour earlier were forced to swim. Wounded soldiers lost footing first. British naval logs confirm unusual water movement that night, consistent with a full tidal surge. In darkness, inside tangled roots, retreat became impossible.
Human memory under stress is unreliable. This matters at Ramree. British sailors reported screams all night long. But in mangrove swamps, sound behaves strangely. Gunshots echo. Men thrashed in water create violent splashing. Animals, wild pigs, birds, reptiles, add to the noise. Some historians argue that what sounded like mass slaughter may have been a combination of drowning, combat injuries, and panic. Others counter that the pattern and duration of the screams were unlike anything sailors had heard in battle. What remains clear
Whatever occurred in that swamp did not happen quickly.
Could crocodiles have killed hundreds of men in one night? Biologists caution against simple answers. Saltwater crocodiles are capable of lethal attacks, but they do not hunt cooperatively. However, they do congregate in feeding conditions. Blood in water attracts multiple individuals. Struggling prey triggers repeated attacks, and wounded humans behave like injured animals. Modern studies confirm crocodiles can kill far more than they consume during chaotic feeding events. In a confined swamp, over many hours, under tidal conditions, large numbers of fatalities become biologically possible.
Here is where Ramree becomes controversial. Early post-war accounts claimed over 900 men entered the swamp. Later, military historians suggest the number may have been closer to 700. Survivor counts vary. Some British reports list about 20 survivors. Others suggest fewer than 50. A minority of sources claim several hundred escaped over days. There is no definitive roll call, no mass grave, no final report. What exists instead is a narrowing truth. Most of the garrison did not survive. Most of the deaths occurred in the swamp, and nature, whether by crocodiles, tide, disease, or terror, did what no opposing army needed to finish.
The Ramree story entered popular history decades after the war. In the 1950s, British naturalist Bruce Stanley Wright published his account of the swamp, describing a night of screaming that will probably never be duplicated. His description was later cited by the Guinness Book of World Records, which labeled Ramree Island the deadliest animal attack in recorded history. But Guinness relied on secondary testimony, not forensic evidence. No battlefield inspection was possible. No bodies were recovered. No autopsies conducted. Guinness recorded the claim, but did not verify the number. And that distinction matters.
Japanese documentation from Ramree is almost non-existent. By early 1945, Japan's Burma Command was collapsing. Units were destroyed faster than records could be kept. Many officers died during the retreat. Others were cut off completely. Cultural factors also played a role. The Imperial Japanese Army did not prioritize recording defeats involving surrender or disorder. A mass death caused by environment, not combat, would not have been preserved in official history. What silence exists in the Japanese archives is not evidence of exaggeration, but of institutional collapse.
Modern viewers often ask a dangerous question. Did they deserve it? Ramree cannot be understood as punishment. Yes, Japanese forces committed documented atrocities across Southeast Asia. Yes, Allied POWs were abused, starved, and executed. But Ramree was not retribution. British forces did not drive the garrison into the swamp to be killed by animals. They sealed an escape route during a military operation. What happened afterward was not ordered, not planned, and not celebrated by those who heard it. British veterans rarely spoke of Ramree. When they did, they spoke quietly.
Strip away legend, outrage, and fascination, and a smaller, colder truth remains. On Ramree Island, a large Japanese force attempted escape. They entered a hostile mangrove swamp. Many were wounded, exhausted, and disoriented. The tide rose. Panic spread. Large predators were present. By morning, most of the force was gone. Whether crocodiles killed dozens or hundreds will likely never be known. But Ramree stands as a warning that war does not only kill through weapons.
Sometimes war removes the last barrier between humans and a world that does not care who survives.
Modern military historians approach Ramree cautiously. No historian disputes that most of the Japanese garrison was lost. The debate is about how. Some argue crocodile attacks were numerous but not dominant, one factor among many: drowning, infection, dehydration, exhaustion. Others point to eyewitness consistency, the region's crocodile density, and the improbability of mass survival in such terrain. The prevailing view today is not that the story is false, but that it is unknowable in exact numbers.
One of the strongest indicators of Ramree's impact is not what veterans said, but what they did not. British Royal Marines who served there rarely included Ramree in memoirs. When mentioned, it appears briefly, without detail, often followed by silence. Veterans who had endured years of combat still described Ramree as not one of the good times. This was not pride. It was memory best left untouched.
Ramree Island endures because it resists categorization. It is not a massacre in the traditional sense, not a battle, not an atrocity ordered by men. It is a collision between military desperation and an environment that offered no mercy. The story survives because it challenges assumptions that humans control the battlefield, that war follows rules, and that nature remains neutral. At Ramree, none of those were true.
History demands humility. There are events where evidence runs out and certainty becomes impossible. Ramree is one of them. What history can say is this: men entered the swamp. Most never returned. Nature played a lethal role, and no victory came from their deaths. What history cannot say is how many screams belong to crocodiles and how many to fear itself.
On Ramree Island, war stripped men of weapons, formations, and commands, and left them alone in the dark. No enemies followed them into the swamp. No orders guided them through it. Only rising water, confusion, and a world that did not recognize uniforms. Whatever the exact number, the men who disappeared there did not die as soldiers, but as humans caught in something far larger than war. Ramree Island remains a reminder. Not all battlefields are made by men. Some are waiting long before armies arrive.